Good day, two-wheel friends. Zack here with RevZilla, and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider, where we learn about motorcycles as we ride. Our guest for this episode is the Ducati Monster. It weighs about 400 pounds, it makes about 100 horsepower, and this being the upspec SP version, it costs a little under $16,000. Now, any motorcycle nerd will tell you that the Ducati Monster is one of the most famous names in the world of motorcycling. And it's been many different things over the years, from sort of a basic gateway beginner bike to a fire-breathing, high-horsepower sport bike killer. This latest version is very different than the original Monster that debuted back in 1993, and yet it's very much the same. So, on the ride to work today, we'll talk about the revolution of the Ducati Monster, the evolution of the Ducati Monster, and where it fits into the world of motorcycling today. Let's ride, everybody. Alrighty, everybody, before we get going on this Ducati Monster daily ride, a quick reminder that this daily ride is brought to you by RevZilla, not just the YouTube channel that you are watching, but also an e-commerce company that sells parts, accessories, and apparel for motorcycles and people who love them. So the next time you need something for you or your bike, if you choose to spend that money at RevZilla, a little bit of your spending will go into making videos like this. That's all. That's the message. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Alrighty, Ducati Monster SP. We'll start with the basics as we always do. This is a 937cc 90-degree V-twin, very much quintessential Ducati in this day and age. It's a little bit shrouded by these plastic covers for the valve train and whatnot, but you can kind of see the cast cylinders under there. It's a fairly utilitarian engine. It's used, of course, in the Super Sport, in the Multistrada V2, in the 950 Hyper, and in the Desert X. And I think it's probably more exposed in this bike than almost any other, maybe the Hyper. We'll talk more about the engine, of course, as the ride goes on. The big news with this new Monster, when it came out in 2021, I believe, is this cast aluminum frame. Historically, Monsters have used a steel trellis, a set of tubular steel triangles that kind of come down and brace the engine and provide the skeleton for the motorcycle. For this version of the Monster, Ducati decided to go with a more typical cast aluminum frame and a cast aluminum subframe. All of that makes the Monster lighter than its predecessors. At least that's what Ducati says about why it made that decision. Of course, it changes the look of the bike quite a bit, and anyone who knows the way that old Monsters looked will be a little bit taken aback by the fact that there's no steel trellis like there's always been. Other componentry is very much standard Ducati. This is the SP version, like I said, the upspec SP version, which we'll talk a little more about later. But that means you get an Öhlins shock and you get this Öhlins fork instead of the base stuff, which is Sachs and Showa maybe, or just Sachs. I'm not exactly sure. Anywho, it's very high-end stuff, and of course you get these Brembo Stylema calipers on the SP instead of the slightly less exotic Brembo calipers on the base Monster Plus. Steel braided lines, radial pull master cylinder, all this sort of like high-end stuff that you expect to see on a $16,000 Ducati, and this bike's got it. Let's see what else you get with the SP. You get this fancy carbon-tipped Termignoni exhaust, or muffler anyway, and then little color splash wheels maybe. The paint, you get the fancy paint, this sort of multi-tone red paint that kind of looks like the MotoGP bike a little bit. Slightly taller seat, which we'll talk about in a minute here, but you know, very basically, it's like an engine, a seat, two wheels, and a handlebar. It's a fairly elemental motorcycle, which is what a Ducati Monster is supposed to be. And of course, there's lots of other little nuance and details that we'll talk about as we ride. For now, let's fire up this something, what is it, 4.3 inch TFT maybe? Kind of clean and classy. We'll talk more about that later. Oh yeah, I think you get the steering damper with the SP as well, which I'm not actually that interested in, but I think you get that. All right, let's fire it up, everybody. It's got this, you know, sexy, termy muffler with the carbon tip, and it's got these like hexagonal grates over the muffler, like very MotoGP, very high performance. If you look in there, you can see that there's a little outlet that's about the size of my finger or thumb maybe. So it's not a terribly loud motorcycle. It's very much a street legal sound and feel from the muffler, even though it looks real racy. Definitely energetic though, that's for sure. So let's get to riding it already, huh? Anyone else have sweat running down their back from standing in a parking lot in the sun talking about motorcycles? No, it's just me. Okie doke. Fair enough. Well, off we go. Now that we're rolling, we can go through some more specific specifications. This is a 937cc V-twin, as I said. Makes about 111 horsepower and some amount of torques, which I don't remember. All that's listed in the description of the video as usual. It weighs a little more than 400 pounds, 412 pounds to be precise on the Daily Rider scales, with a full 3.7 gallons of gasoline in the tank. And the MSRP for this SP version is $15,695, I believe, so just under 16 grand. I rounded up. Hopefully you'll forgive me. The seat height, as we sit at this red light briefly, 33.1 inches, which is a little taller than the base bike, the Monster Plus. But you can actually get a Monster Plus with a seat height as low as, I believe, 30.5 inches, which is pretty low if you use the lowering link and the suspension and all that jazz. The price of the base Monster Plus is around $13,000, I think, something like that. So there's about a $3,000 spread between the base bike, which has a little bit more of a beginner feel, and this SP, which has the high-spec suspension and some of the other stuff that we talked about. Oop, green light already, here we go. But the two bikes share the engine and chassis and most of the sort of basic specs and feel. Speaking of feel, I say quintessential is a good way to describe the riding position too. The seat is sort of firm, and 33.1 inch seat is fairly tall. The handlebar is sort of not wide and not narrow. Legroom is not cramped and tight like a sport bike, but also the pegs feel pretty high up. They feel pretty sporty. It's sort of the riding position you'd expect and you'd want from a sporty naked bike like this. The big thing that I really noticed when I sit on the Monster is how kind of small it feels, especially between the knees. It's very narrow, and though the seat height is significant, I would say, at a little over 33 inches, the standover height's not that bad. It doesn't feel like a super high seat. It feels very compact, almost like a 7/8 size motorcycle, which is nice considering nothing about the specifications is 7/8 size, but the feel sitting on it is very lithe, compact. It's nice. Alrighty, on to the freeway here, going 40 something miles an hour. We're gonna roll the throttle on and hope this Range Rover doesn't cut us off. Obviously not a super extensive performance test there, but when you roll the throttle on at 5,000-6,000 RPM, especially in, you know, second, third, fourth gear, something like that, it hits pretty hard. What is that, 110, 111 horsepower? So, you know, figure around 100 realistically at the wheel, and like, it's a nice amount of horsepower. I said for many years that 100 horsepower usually satisfies me, and the Monster SP is a good example of that. The riding position is sporty and compact, as I said, but it's not uncomfortable. It's pretty good. Even at 6'2", I feel like I've got a little bit of room to move forward and back on the seat. Legroom is, you know, like I said, sporty, but not ridiculous. In general, pretty comfortable. I actually think the seat is a nice shape. The density of the foam is good. I was impressed at how supportive and, I don't know, kind of well thought out the seat feels. It's not perfect. After a couple hours in the saddle, my buns got a little bit tired of it. You know, kind of as you'd expect from a sport naked bike like this. In general, I don't know, didn't have a lot of complaints. I think it's pretty good. Another thing I suppose might be worth talking about is vibes from the engine. I think I might have complained a little bit about the Ducati Desert X adventure bike, which uses the same engine, and how it was kind of vibey, surprisingly so, in situations like this. I don't think the Monster is too bad. You get kind of a nice pulse through the handlebar and the foot pegs. The foot pegs are rubber coated, I believe. Yeah, there's rubber on the foot pegs, which kind of tells me that Ducati was a little bit worried about the vibes, and so they softened that a little bit. I get kind of exactly the feel that I would want from a machine like this in this situation. It's not plush and ultra comfortable, but I feel connected to the bike, and it's kind of the way that I feel like I should be. As for fuel mileage and range, I'm completely blanking on what my fuel mileage figures were. I want to say they were in the low 40s. We'll put the average fuel mileage on screen here. I will tell you that anecdotally, I often saw the fuel light come on just over 100 miles, which is pretty aggressive. 3.7 gallons of gas in the tank, so you're not getting a ton of range. Anytime the fuel light comes on before 110, 120 miles, I'm always kind of like, wow, that seems early. I was able to learn though that the fuel gauge is pretty pessimistic, so that's good, because that means when the bike says you only got 20 miles of range left, you're actually good for a little bit more than that in my experience. Not that I would recommend you test it too much. Point being, not a touring bike obviously, and I reckon you can get 140, 150 miles out of a tank, but the fuel light probably going to come on pretty soon after the trip meter rolls over into triple digits, and that might be a little bit nerve-wracking depending on the kind of rider you are. For a quick review of the mirrors, I can say right now we're going just 65, 70 miles an hour here, and the mirrors are pretty smooth actually. That's at 4,500 RPM, something like that. However, the mirrors are not placed particularly well, I don't think. I mostly get a view of my forearm. They're just like not quite high enough or not quite far enough out, one or the other. They're sleek and the shape's not bad, but in general not my favorite. Plus, like I said, at 4,500 RPM or something like that, they're not too bad. But if you go faster, we'll downshift just to get an example, and you're pulling maybe 5,500 revs or something like that, they start to blur a little bit. I never really expect Ducati Monster mirrors to be particularly good, but you know, I wouldn't hate being surprised, is all I'm saying. Into the neighborhood for the Round Town Challenge, and of course, the Footless Stop Challenge. See how the old Monster does. Fairly lightweight and pretty direct. Oh, that was a pretty good one. Yeah, pretty good one. I historically, I don't love the feel of hydraulic clutches. I think cable operated clutches are like a little better for transmitting that feel to the rider, but this one's pretty good, I gotta say. I find that KTM and Ducati hydraulic clutches in particular seem pretty refined, and I reckon that's because a lot of the bikes have them. They've been doing it a while. And as for throttle response, ooh yeah, that was a good one. A little shaky at the beginning, but nailed it. I think throttle response is pretty good. There are a few ride modes. There's road, sport, and urban maybe, or wet. What is it? I'll have to look. But you can adjust the throttle response for varying degrees of aggression. I usually just leave it in road. I think that that's the best sort of version of the motorcycle. It doesn't leave me wanting for power or for softness and tractability. And I think in general, it has maybe a few ride-by-wire gremlins where it doesn't feel quite as direct as or connected as a classic cable throttle might, but in general, it's awfully good, I think. I've adapted to it quite quickly. The engine is in a relatively friendly state of tune. It's not too hot-blooded, even though it kind of backfires and sputters and stuff sometimes. Oop, I messed that one up. But all of the backfiring and sputtering and whatnot feels very intentional. It's only like on decel, anytime you pick up the throttle, it feels smooth and yeah, connected in exactly the way that I feel like it should be. Ducati definitely seems like they're tuning that stuff in. It's something I've noticed on other bikes, like even the big Street Fighter V4, it kind of sounds like metallic and monstrous, if you'll pardon the pun, kind of like rah, 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 I'm gonna bite your head off. And then when you actually ride it, it's pretty smooth and easy. And I think Ducati's done a good job lately balancing that that kind of outward-facing attitude with actually motorcycles that are easy to use, which I totally appreciate. On to Lover's Lane, where we talk about passenger accommodations. This bike does have passenger pegs, but of course it has that racy cowl over where the passenger seat should be. I did not test passenger accommodations. I do not think there are going to be very many surprises. I will say my guess, it'll feel kind of sport bikey back there. The pegs are fairly high. It's not going to be like an all-day comfortable place to sit for a passenger, but it'll be serviceable if that's something you want to do even on the reg. Into the twisty section of the daily rider route. Monster's real good at this. I sometimes ride bikes that weigh 500 pounds and I say, oh, it just like feels so light when you go through corners. And they do. Certainly, I'm not blowing smoke when I say that, you know. Well-engineered motorcycles will feel very light to the touch and they feel good when you drift through a set of corners. The thing about the Monster is that it's already light. It already weighs a little over 400 pounds, which is a good weight for a bike like this. It doesn't have to fool you into thinking that it's light. It is light, and it is narrow, it is small, It means that it doesn't have to cut any corners or sort of pull any tricks. It just has to be itself. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of a lighter motorcycle that has this much horsepower and this kind of refinement with Olin suspension and Brembo brakes and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily look as unique as it used to look, the Monster, and maybe it's lost some of its flair in some other categories. But as far as being a unique combination of attributes, especially on a twisty road, I think it has that. It's responsive and powerful in all the ways that it should be to carry the Monster torch. Anyway, back to reality, I suppose. Back to surface streets and the rest of our commute. Coming up on this red light, let's talk about brakes, shall we? Good brakes. Real good, I think. High spec, Brembo, stylemic calipers down there. Not technically the hotness anymore in Brembo's lineup, but really high quality stuff. Got into the ABS kind of fast there. I'm actually a little surprised. So let me just jump into the menu here and see. So riding mode, there is road, wet, sport. They're all programmable, which I like about Ducatis. They say, we give you these ride modes, we give you some parameters, but you can just change anything you want. You can make wet the ride mode that has ultra fast throttle response and maximum power if you want to, and traction control off, whatever. You can just do whatever you want with each one of the modes, which I think is kind of smart. I like that. So I'm going to go into road. Actually, we're going to look at, you can see you got programming for the engine, traction control, ABS, wheelie control, quick shifter, and some other stuff maybe. We're going to turn rear ABS off and sport ABS. We're going to try that. See how that goes. Oh, it's getting a big warning there on the dash that says rear ABS off, which is probably fair, but I'm just kind of curious to experiment with the brakes again if we get to another stoplight there. Sometimes this part of the ride we talk about whether or not you'd buy this bike just for the engine, and it's an interesting discussion with the Monster because obviously it doesn't set itself apart much in the world of Ducati by having a 90-degree Desmodromic V-twin, but among its other competitors, yeah, right? I mean, you can't get this engine in anything else, whether it's a Yamaha MT-09, a KTM 890, I don't know, whatever else you want to compare it to. It does have a unique sound and feel, and is classically Ducati, which is, I think, has some value. I guess I don't think it's the most charismatic or potent or classic engine that Ducati has ever produced, but within the 2024 lineup, it's like I said, it's kind of a staple. And I appreciate that, even if it's not super evocative. All right, coming up on another yellow light here. We can do one more brake test. What do you think? We can jump on the brakes. Yeah, see, I like that better. You can hear the front wheel locking up a little bit, which of course is flirting with danger, but having only front ABS on it made it a lot more aggressive. Doesn't just cut an ABS when the, two different wheel speeds change. And I suppose I could spin through the dash to some extent. We kind of already did. You jump into this setting menu here and you can adjust all the kind of usual stuff that you'd expect to be. Oh, they spelled tire wrong. I wonder if we have a British bike here or something. Anyway, it's sort of a basic set of menus as far as Ducati is concerned, and I think the dash is kind of small, but it's got a lot of info and I think it's pretty easy to read. But to take a step back, to take a step way back from the dash and to see the whole motorcycle and the whole line, the Monster came out in 1993 and was sort of an immediate lightning rod. People really were drawn to it, and there were many, many different iterations over the years, so many different engine types and styles and levels of exoticism in the lineup. The Monster has been so many, many different things over the years that it's a little bit hard to pin down what it should be now. But the fact that it's been an icon in motorcycling, there have been 100 and something horsepower superbike engine powered Monsters, as well as 600cc city bikes with the Monster name. The weight of the icon is what this bike is bearing, and it's really hard, I think, to accept that it is one thing when the Monster in history has been so many things. But I guess what I would land on is that I don't know exactly what I would change about this bike. Do I miss the trellis frame? Yes. Do I miss the dry clutch? Yes. Do I miss the air-cooled engine? Yeah, sure. It looks cool, it sounds cool, it has real presence in a way that this bike kind of doesn't. It has lost a little bit. But considering the constraints of what Ducati's trying to do, they're trying to make bikes lighter, they're trying to make them legal for government regulations and blah, blah, blah. I kind of see why Ducati went in this direction, and I find it a little hard to be completely frustrated with the result, because the result is pretty good, actually. And like at least a little bit monstrous. I guess if I was going to change one thing, I might work on having it run a little bit cooler, because the 75-degree day, after sitting at that traffic light, it's at a little over 200 degrees engine temp, and my legs are hot. And I know that's a classic Ducati thing, to cook your legs. This bike, you know, this amount of horsepower, like it's a fast enough bike, sure, but it's, I don't know, it doesn't feel like the amount of heat that blows on my legs on a 75-degree day is commensurate with the amount of performance on tap, though it is significant. I appreciate what the Monster has always been and what it is today. It's just another step in the evolution. And I guess I'll be excited to see what's next. What's next for the ride is pretty obvious. That's a dirt road shortcut, right? We can play around with some traction control. I don't remember exactly how many settings of traction control this bike has. We can play around with that a little bit here. So let's go to level 3. So this is sport, relatively safe and stable version of sport traction control, according to the dash. We'll give that a try. I mean, like, it's letting me accelerate more than I really want to, I think. That's actually pretty fun. I like that. And ABS is working just fine. The radiator fan is now on. Let's try to turn it all the way down to performance sport. See what that gets us. Just out of curiosity. It's like, it doesn't like the dirt. You hear it going, yay, 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 yay. Maybe if the engine's spinning a little faster. I mean, it's letting me accelerate so much faster than I would expect. Okay, and then I guess just for the sake of who we are here at Daily Rider, we'll shut it off. There we go. That's good fun. That's good fun, everybody. I'm going to turn TC back on. One of the things I really like about this bike and the settings is that you can, let me see here, road, traction control. So I'm going to turn traction control back on to level 3. It might have been like 5 before, whatever. Level 3 is fine. No big deal ski. But you can see that Ducati wheelie control is off, which is just how I like it. And of course, what we need here, this section of the daily ride. I appreciate that you can separate wheelie control and traction control. So I can have the safety of traction control, but I can also have wheelie control off should I need to prove that this bike can do a wheelie, for example. Oh yeah. Monstrous wheelies. Look at it go. Yes, sir. Dynamite. And of course we still have rear ABS off, so can you back it in? Oh, yes, sir. It's kind of classic Ducati, letting you do stuff like that. It's cool. I like it. And a bike called the Monster should definitely be able to do stuff like that, right? Come on. I mean, come on. All right, not enough parking spaces to do a U-turn, obviously, with all this stupid junk in our way, but we can line up on this line here. I will go feet up. I will go full lock left, and we'll see what we get. Just about 2. Yeah, the steering sweep is acceptable, I would say. I'm not blown away how good it is, but I'm not taken aback at how poor it is, which is something that Ducatis have done historically sometimes, is have steering radiuses that are just surprisingly not good. Woo! That was fun, everybody. I had fun. Did you have fun? I certainly hope so. Let's listen to this sucker one more time, shall we? Interesting. It's got an anti-rev thing. Do you remember, I think Harley Davidson did this too? But look, I can't do it. This is pin. It just holds revs at 4,000 RPM. So you can get like little revs. But that's it. Interesting. Wouldn't have expected Ducati to nanny me in that way. I suppose that's a good segue into some of your Instagram questions and talking about where the motorcycle sits in the world of its peers, this monster. All right, the first question we're going to address here is from Major Llama, who asks, in your heart of hearts, if you had to buy, own, and maintain one, would you take this or a Yamaha MT-10? So, a few things here. One, I would like to call out how many different motorcycles were thrown at me to compare to this monster. Yamaha MT-10 was one. Yamaha MT-09, Yamaha MT-07, Suzuki SV650, KTM 790, KTM 890, Triumph Street Triple, Triumph Speed Triple. The spectrum was just huge. Kawasaki Z900. Lots of bikes that are sort of in this category, sure, but also lots of stuff outside that realm. A little bit of a tip of the cap to Ducati, being that people are so interested in so many different comparisons to this bike. I feel like that says that it can do lots of different things, at least in people's mind. Another thing I'd like to call out in reference to Major Llama's question here about owning and maintaining this bike is Ducati has worked pretty hard to beat back this negative reputation of bikes being maintenance intensive and expensive to own and that kind of thing. So a lot of new Ducatis have pretty long valve service intervals. This one I think is 18,600 miles, something like that, almost 20,000 miles, which I don't know, is pretty good considering the performance you get. Yamaha MT-10 I believe is 26,000 miles, so better yet than the Monster. If I had to own and maintain one, I love the MT-10. I do. I love that engine. It's special. It's cool. I'm not that hung up on its weird looks. And would it be cheaper to own and maintain? Yeah. But I own a KTM now. I didn't buy it because it was cheap to maintain and own. I bought it because I liked it. And I guess that's my sentiment with motorcycle ownership in a broad sense anyway. And I can totally appreciate you being smart about your purchase and I'm going to buy a Kawasaki and not another bike because I want the reputation of Team Green and whatever. That's fair. That's totally fine. I appreciate that and whatever your viewpoint is. But that's not why I buy a bike. Why I buy a bike is sort of the capability, the versatility, and does it speak to me and what I want to do. As much as I love the MT-10, I think that it's heavy and comfortable in a way that steers it away from the type of bike that I like to own. If I'm being honest, I like to own bikes that are a little bit raucous, that are a little bit hot-blooded, and that have a relatively high performance ceiling. MT-10 is a great bike. I dig it, like I said, but I would be drawn to the Ducati. Maybe it's because I never got that Monster S2R that I talked about earlier in the program. I guess the bottom line is I'm not going to buy one of these. And I can reach deep into my heart and tell you that I would probably get a Monster or I'm getting old, I would get an MT-10, but I don't actually know. It's hard to say. That's your decision, Major Llama, and everyone else's, I suppose. Next question is from my buddy Jackson Photo. I'm trying to take too many questions from friends because I don't want to seem like I'm biased here, but this is a good question, objectively. Jackson Photo says, of all the bikes that share the 950 motor, the Hyper 950, the Supersport Desert X Monster, and I think he left out the Multistrada V2, which I believe also uses the same engine, which makes the most out of this engine platform? Good question. I have not complained heavily enough in this episode yet about my problem with this engine. I've told you about the things that I like about it. I think it's very refined. I think it's very good at what it does. I think that little rev thing that we learned about just now, where you pin it when it's parked and it won't rev past 4,000 RPM, that's kind of my issue with this engine in a microcosm. It might be too refined for me. It might be not raw and raucous enough to be a monster. Does it deliver on everything it's supposed to do? Does it have good torque? Does it have good power? Does it have good throttle response? Does it work well when you whip down a set of twisties and pull a wheelie? Absolutely. It does all those things, no question. But do I kind of want it to be a little bit more raucous and raw and, dare I say, unpredictable? Yeah, I kind of do. And I feel like for that reason, I don't think it suits this bike the best of all the ones that were mentioned. And I would say the same thing with the Hyper 950. The advantage of the Hyper 950 is that it's extra silly from a chassis standpoint and sort of encourages you with ergonomics and whatnot to do extra silly things. So that's all well and good. Next, we can talk about the Desert X, which has been reviewed here on Daily Rider for what it's worth. And I think the engine's pretty good off-road, actually, as an adventure engine, but it's not really an off-road engine. Does it have good torque? Yes, sure it does, absolutely. Does it serve the adventure touring purpose pretty well? Yes, but I don't think it's quite off-road focused enough to really nail that in the way that other engines from other manufacturers do a little bit better job, I think. So that leaves the Multistrada V2 and the Supersport. Road-going motorcycles, I think they're a little more elegant, a little bit more majestic maybe, and a little bit more refined, and I think that's where this motor fits the best. I haven't ridden a Supersport in years. I really do like that bike a lot. Multistrada V2 is also good. To answer your question, I'm going to say it suits the Super Sport best. I think it might be a Super Sport engine. You know, it's grunty, it's utilitarian, it works well as a daily rider, as a Sunday rider, but it's got enough performance that you take it to a track or something like that, you'd have a good time. Which incidentally is something I appreciate about the Monster SP, that it feels like it's really ready to tackle a track day or something like that, which is maybe a reason I'd get it instead of an MT10. Last question. Mitchell Jimmy Ryan asked the question that many people did in the comment section of this Instagram post, which is, which character is this from Pixar's Monsters Incorporated? And would the scare meter be high? I love a Disney or Pixar question, as some of you may know. If you're familiar with Monsters, Inc., which Mitchell Jimmy Ryan, I assume you are, as are at least a dozen other people who asked a similar question, I'm going to go with the Abominable Snowman. Not a main character in Monsters, Inc., but you remember the Abominable Snowman? Remember Sully and Mike, they get sent out to the snowy wasteland, and they see the Abominable Snowman, and they're like, oh my God, the Abominable Snowman, oh no. And then he turns out to be really nice. He's like, welcome to the Himalayas. Like, why do they call me Abominable? Why not like the Agreeable Snowman? Which I get a kick out of. And I think, again, that's what this bike is, right? This bike is like scary at first sight, maybe. And then you see the name, Monster, oh my gosh. You know, and then when you get to know it, it's actually pretty agreeable, pretty nice, friendly. Maybe not as funny as the Abominable Snowman was in Monsters, Inc., but that's my answer. Well, thank you all so much for the good Instagram questions. I did say in my post, only good questions this time, and I have to say, I think everybody pretty much honored that. It was amazing, really good questions all around. I appreciate you taking the time. Bear with me just a minute longer. We're going to put this sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard, and then I'll let you get on with the rest of your life. Hang on.
Hey, all right, everybody. Here we are inside RevZilla West, and we have a Ducati Monster SP ready to go on the 2024 Daily Rider leaderboard. As a reminder, at the top of the heap there is BMW's R1300 GS, a KTM 890 SMT, and a KTM 1390 Super Duke, which is both pricey and spicy, as we say here on DR. So, Ducati Monster SP, where does it go on the board? I actually think BMW M1000 Single R is an interesting bike to compare the Monster to, because in some ways the M1000 Single R is sort of like a bigger, more advanced, more powerful, more expensive, more version of the Ducati Monster. From the standpoint of being sort of premium, being sporty, and yet trying to be comfortable, that's a bike that I think is surprisingly similar considering how different they are on the spec sheet. And I would say the BMW is better. It's not as approachable, I think, like it's heavier, that kind of thing. The Ducati Monster is small and narrow and like does feel approachable in many ways. But I think that the BMW is still better. It's better with refinement, with features like cruise control. It's better with the seats more comfortable, dissipates heat a little bit better, stuff like that. The Monster is not as good as an F900 GS, just from a versatility standpoint. Sorry, not as good. Scrambler 1200X, that's also a very good motorcycle. Here's the thing. The Monster's gonna go on the board right here, above the Kawasaki Z900 SE, below the BMW F900 GS. And here's my rationale. F900 GS goes above the Monster because it just has that versatility. It's a comfortable touring bike, realistically, certainly compared to the Monster anyway. And it has all those off-road chops, which is pretty good. The Monster, I think, has sporting chops beyond what people might expect. I think that bike, I didn't ride it on track, I can't say, but I bet it's pretty good, like good enough to really keep an intermediate, maybe even low-level expert track rider entertained for at least a day on the track. That Monster SP, it's sharp, really tight, good package. That's what the Z900 SE does not have. I think it will deliver on a lot of the promises that the brochure makes. I don't think it has that like sharp performance edge that the Monster has, and I think in this category, that's worth something. So I'm gonna give the nod to the Monster SP, and I think that's not a bad spot to land. I guess it's sort of mid-pack, which maybe will be an insult to people who love Ducatis. From a naked sport bike standpoint, you're behind a Super Duke and an M1000 Single R. That's pretty good company. The Monster SP is on the board. That means I can let you go, and I can thank you for hanging out for another ride. Appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Please ride safe. See you next time.
Coming up on this red light, let's talk about brakes, shall we?